Excellency Limpo Dr. Tandi Dorji, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and External Trade of Bhutan, and other senior officials of the Royal Government of Bhutan. This visit of His Majesty, which has been long in planning, takes forward our long-standing tradition of regular high-level exchanges between India and Bhutan. Just to sketch the outline frame of the cooperation between our two countries, you are aware that India and Bhutan share an exemplary relationship which is characterized by trust, goodwill, mutual understanding. It's a time-tested nature of our friendship which was reflected in the support that we provided to Bhutan during the COVID pandemic, including the Vaccine Maitri program, as also in the expansion of our partnership into some of the new emerging areas and domains of economic cooperation, which includes digital domain, space, a new area, financial connectivity and increasing interoperability, etc. Hydropower, again, strong element of our cooperation, which most recently has included handing over of the 720 megawatt Mangdechu hydroelectric power project to the Royal Government of Bhutan. You would all recall perhaps that His Majesty was last in Delhi during his transit visit in September 2022. At that time also he had a brief meeting with the Honorable Prime Minister. In terms of the program elements of His Majesty's ongoing visit, as I mentioned, His Majesty arrived yesterday afternoon. External Affairs Minister called on His Majesty in the evening yesterday and hosted a dinner in His Majesty's honor, which actually involved good discussions and interaction with the key CEOs of some of the Indian companies. This morning, His Majesty visited Rajghat to pay his tribute to Mahatma Gandhi, and thereafter His Majesty had a meeting with Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. The meeting was also followed by lunch hosted by the Honorable Prime Minister, and later this evening His Majesty will meet Rashtrapati Ji. The bilateral discussions between His Majesty and the Prime Minister, as would be expected, covered the entire gamut of India-Bhutan cooperation and also issues of respective national and mutual interest. Let me briefly share with you its key elements as also the outcomes that we would be working on here onwards following the discussions between His Majesty and the Prime Minister. First up, His Majesty briefed the Honorable Prime Minister on his significant transformation and reform initiative that Bhutan is currently undertaking. Prime Minister, on his part, reiterated India's continued and full support to the socio-economic development in Bhutan, based, of course, on the priorities of the Royal Government and in keeping with the transformation initiatives and reform process as per the vision of His Majesty. More specifically, there were 5 broad range discussion range issues. First was on economic and development partnership. This covered in turn many elements, which included cooperation for Bhutan's 13th 5-year plan, whose process is beginning from next year onwards. Support, including relevant financial support for the reform process in Bhutan. Support also for the institutional capacity building in Bhutan, and project-based development partnership, which is one of the key pillars of our development cooperation with Bhutan. Second bucket of issues was relating to trade, connectivity and investment cooperation, which in turn included discussions on infrastructure connectivity, whether pertaining to integrated checkposts, rail connectivity, air connectivity, digital connectivity, people-to-people linkages, and of course the inland waterways, of which we have spoken in the past also. The third related element pertained to long-term and sustainable trade facilitation measures that India and Bhutan could take, which would link to the economic growth and prosperity of both economies. For, as I just hinted in the beginning, as part of new paradigms on energy cooperation, which would of course strengthen the existing frame and specifics of hydropower cooperation, but also carry forward our cooperation in this domain into non-hydro renewable space. And the last subsegment in the economic chapeau relating to new sectors, which, as I mentioned, space, startups, cooperation in the field of STEM education as part of the bilateral partnership. In this context, the recent launch of India-Bhutan satellite, which was jointly developed by the space engineers from both countries, was particularly appreciated. In terms of specific outcomes, which, as I said, we would be following up based on the discussions between His Majesty and the Honorable Prime Minister. One, it was agreed that India would step up its support to Bhutan's upcoming 13th five-year plan. The specifics of this support, its distribution into different projects, that is something which is to be worked out between the two systems going forward. Two, at Bhutan's request, India would work to extend an additional standby credit facility. This would be over and above the two existing standby credit facilities that is operating between the two countries. Third, as I just mentioned a brief while earlier, we would work to shape long-term sustainable arrangements for export of agricultural commodities from Bhutan. Also work to develop long-term bilateral arrangements for assured supply of critical commodities to Bhutan, which would include petroleum, fertilizers, and coal. We are also examining and considering setting up the first integrated checkpost along India-Bhutan border, which would be somewhere near Jaigaon. The exact specific location of the ICP is yet to be determined, but the broad location point is known. Fifth, we will also try and expedite the proposed Kokrajhar-Gelifu rail link project through GOI, Government of India support, in consultation, of course, with the Bhutanese side. This in some ways will be historic because this would be the first ever rail link between India and Bhutan, and naturally links up well to the rest of the regional connectivity infrastructure in South Asia. In the field of hydropower specifically, which has been the cornerstone of our economic relationship, we agreed to an upward revision of tariff of the Chukha hydroelectric project. This is the oldest hydroelectric project with Bhutan and is of great significance. In the space of hydropower itself, we will consider positively Bhutan's request to sell power from its hydropower project known as Basuchu hydroelectric project. This would be perhaps done through the energy exchange mechanism of the market. The details are yet to be worked out, but the discussion is that it could be done through the market exchange mechanism. Again, based on the CBT guidelines of the Government of India, we would extend favorable consideration to Bhutan's request regarding power trade and access to financing for new and upcoming hydropower projects. Again, the specifics of this would vary from project to project and would naturally be in sync with our CBT guidelines. And also, as I mentioned earlier, expand our energy partnership to include non-hydro renewables, particularly in the field of solar, and also maybe see how the bilateral cooperation between our two countries in the field of e-mobility could be expanded. Besides the existing range of hydropower projects and also exploring the non-hydro renewable space, we would also try and expedite the finalization of modalities for new hydroelectric projects, hydropower projects, including the Sankosh hydroelectric project. As you can see from this listing and description, the ongoing visit of His Majesty has provided an excellent opportunities for both India and Bhutan to not only review the full range of bilateral engagement, advance it further in all these areas which I mentioned here, but also at the same time sketch a roadmap in terms of the next steps that we would take to further our multifaceted cooperation and partnership. I'll stop here and take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll start with Neeraj. No, Neeraj.
सर, नीरज हूँ न्यूज 18 इंडिया से। डोकलाम मसले पे कोई चर्चा हुई? हाल ही में भूटान के प्रधानमंत्री के बयान की काफ़ी चर्चा थी, उस संदर्भ में कोई बातचीत हुई?
देखिए नीरज जी, जो आपका प्रश्न था, कविता जी जो आपने भी भारत के जो राष्ट्रीय हित हैं, भूटान के जो राष्ट्रीय हित हैं, भूटान भारत संबंधों के जो हित हैं, वो उसका केंद्र बिंदु उभर के सामने आता है। देखिए, जैसे मैंने शुरू में भी कहा कि भारत भूटान जो संबंध हैं उनके कुछ मुख्य आधार हैं। आधार हैं शेयर्ड वैल्यूज़, ट्रस्ट, एज आई सेड, म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट एंड अ क्लोज अंडरस्टैंडिंग and sensitivity to each other's interests and concerns. I'm sorry, I'm going to migrate between English and Hindi because part of the questions were in Hindi, part of them were in English. Now, besides this exemplary and unique relationship that India and Bhutan have, we also have a time-tested framework of security cooperation. And as part of that, both countries maintain a long-standing tradition of very close consultations on matters relating to their mutual interest and, of course, security also. Now, in this context, the intertwined and indivisible nature of our security concerns is self-evident. With regard to the specificity which was inherent in some of the questions, all I would say is that Government of India very closely follows all developments which have a bearing on our national interest, and we would take all necessary measures to safeguard them as necessary. Now, as regards the recent statements and the related commentary to them is concerned, I would say, one, that India and Bhutan remain in close touch relating to our shared interest, including security interest. And I would only reiterate, our earlier statements on this issue, which very explicitly and very clearly bring out our position on the determination of the tri-junction boundary points. कविता जी, नीरज जी, यदि मैं आपके प्रश्न को थोड़ा आगे बढ़ा के कहूँ, यदि आप दोनों देशों के संबंधों का मूलभूत आधार देखें, मूलभूत संरचना देखें, उनकी विविधताओं की का अगर आप पूरी तरह से अवलोकन करें तो आप 5-6 चीज़ें पाएंगे। एक, प्रगाढ़ मित्रता। दूसरा, सकारात्मक दृष्टिकोण। तीसरा, सहयोग और सहकार्य, जो कि दोनों समाजों की प्रगति का आधार है, विकास यात्रा का आधार है। और जैसे कि मैंने कहा, एक ट्रस्ट और म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट एंड सेंसिटिविटी। So I think I'll just stop here in terms of covering all that. जो आपने मुकेश जी, जो खुनबिंग से रिलेटेड जो आपका प्रश्न था, देखिए भूटान चीन के बीच में क्या वार्ता उनकी बाउंड्री को लेके है, वो प्रश्न चीन और भूटान के समक्ष आप रखेंगे तो शायद वो ज़्यादा उचित रहेगा मेरे हिसाब से।